Welcome to Conflict and War Studies, everyone. I'm your host, Rabia. In today's episode, we'll focus on the rising tensions between the European Union and Russia, the concept of hybrid warfare, what these developments mean for Europe's defense future. Today, we're joined once again by retired Brigadier General Ufuk Uras. Let's start with this week's EU summit in Copenhagen. To sum up the meeting aptly, leaders met to discuss measures to counter Russian hybrid warfare and also the EU membership of Ukraine and Moldova. Does this tougher EU stance signal a direct military engagement in the Ukraine-Russia war or more of a defensive deterrent posture?
That signals definitely that the EU is increasing its stance against Russia, but it doesn't mean at this stage a direct military confrontation. And I have to also say that the majority of the European countries are at the same time NATO countries. Usually the EU and NATO works collaboratively and military activities are mostly carried out by NATO, while the civil dimension is addressed by EU. In this situation, in terms of the so-called Russian hybrid warfare, this is referred to the drone disruptions over the airports in some European countries. The Europe has decided to improve its anti-drone capabilities. In this case, European Union will be responsible for the financing the projects. NATO will assume the development of the anti-drone projects.
Can we take EU as a whole at their stance?
So EU is not directly discussing how to fight a war against Russia. EU is discussing the measures, and the measures mostly in economic and civil dimension. So in terms of, as I said, the anti-drone systems development, Europe is focusing on how to finance this project. Because it's a large project, they say that it is a drone wall, anti-drone wall. It's not a wall, it will be part of the multi-layered air defense system in Europe, and this will be a joint project with NATO and European Union.
Let's unpack the term hybrid warfare then. What does it actually mean in today's context?
The hybrid warfare is initially spoken in Afghanistan in the employment of the Western forces in Afghanistan. The forces had to carry out both irregular and sometimes regular warfare tactics in a combined style. The term initially was discussed in Afghanistan, but then it evolved. The term is officially named hybrid warfare, especially after Russia's annexation of Crimea. The Russian General Gerasimov was the Chief of General Staff, wrote an article, I think it was in 2013. The name of the article was Nonlinear Warfare. This nonlinear warfare is taken as hybrid war by the West. General Gerasimov stated that the West uses controlled instability concept against many countries. The West creates instabilities with the use of civil resources mostly. Then it is supported by military activities. The West intervenes into those countries and then they establish a pro-Western government and pro-Western institutions. The purpose of the nonlinear warfare is to counter this Western so-called controlled instability concept. And the Russia's nonlinear warfare is named by the West as hybrid war. This is indeed prospects the employment of both conventional and non-conventional military and non-military, regular and irregular warfare tools, methods, and tactics. One of the main objectives is hybrid warfare is to create confusion and ambiguity over the adversary. In the initial phases of this warfare, the activities are kept at a lower level under the threshold of the adversary's response. The conditions are set for a decisive action. If required, this decisive action could be a military action.
So is Russia currently waging hybrid warfare against European countries? And how central is the drone war to that strategy, that drone war you mentioned before?
Russia has these capabilities. Although there is no evidence that Russia is doing this, it seems like Russia does this. The drone incursions over the airports caused the suspension of air traffic for some time in many European countries. Russia could be behind these actions. The main objective of Russia with this is to deter the European countries for their increasing support to Ukraine. And also it may be a message to European publics that Russia is capable of disrupting things in Europe. Yes, Russia is capable of doing that, and Russia may be behind these. One of the characteristics of hybrid warfare is that its deniability, and Russia has denied this. But on the other side, there are different opinions. Some people say that Europe wants to go to a war against Russia, and these are some fabricated actions indeed carried out by Europe.
General, could these kinds of hybrid attacks ever lead to invoking NATO's Article 5, or do they remain intentionally below that threshold?
NATO is mostly concerned about Russian actions in the Baltics region because the Baltic states are small states and there are also a high number of Russian-speaking people who still live in those countries. The intensity of the hybrid warfare indeed is the factor that determines the invocation of Article 5. The drone incursions over the airports cannot be considered as an aggression, but if the intensity of such actions goes up, this may lead to the discussion of the invocation of Article 5 in NATO. On the other side, I have to also say that Russia would never want to go to a war with NATO. NATO is a large organization comprised of 32 member nations. Russia is facing difficulty only fighting in Ukraine. How could we fight against 32 nations?
So, General, I want to talk about the energy politics and EU division. So, Hungary's Viktor Orban and Slovakia's Robert Fico are openly against halting oil and gas imports from Russia, which was the main sanction imposed. Both Slovakia and Hungary's presidents, they have shown skepticism towards Ukraine's EU membership. So, these were the two major topics. Why do you think are these leaders opposing the mainstream European position?
In terms of the gas and oil exports or imports from Russia, they say that they are geographically and economically dependent on Russian oil and gas. They are landlocked countries, so they say that they don't have much alternatives other than buying Russian oil and gas. The Russian oil and gas is cheaper than the US LNG. This is one reason. They are against Ukraine's EU membership. Especially Viktor Orban has stated that he went to referendum in his country and his people do not want Ukraine's EU membership. He believes that if Ukraine becomes EU member, the war will be brought into Europe.
Yeah.
Slovakia leader Fico stated that they joined Europe because Europe was peaceful. If Europe goes to a war unnecessarily, this would hamper Europe.
I see. General, I'm also trying to understand why lots of countries now propose for Moldova to join the EU. Why now?
Moldova is also at a very critical location. It's neighboring between Ukraine and Romania.
Yeah.
And Transnistria, part of Moldova, is now under Russian control. In the recent elections, a pro-Western leader won the elections. According to her, Moldova wants to join Europe, and Europe wants Moldova to be a member. So this is like Ukraine. It will be part of containing Russia. As I said in our previous programs, the main goal of the West was to contain Russia in its region.
Yeah.
And the EU membership of Moldova will serve also for this goal, like Ukraine case.
I see. Because of the voices coming from Orban and Fico, there is some kind of dissent. So how does this affect EU unity on sanctions and this enlargement policy in general?
If we analyze it from a broader perspective, European Union was a global power. I say was because it's not a global power today, especially after Brexit. EU has lost power. There are opposition movements in some European countries against the current EU position. EU is now facing a relevancy question. The Ukraine and Russia war legitimizes the unity of EU. For this reason, the same thing also applies to NATO. In 1991, when the Cold War ended, the presence of NATO was collective defense, and because the Warsaw Pact dissolved, there was no mission for NATO. With the discussions, NATO was given two new missions. The first one was cooperative security, and the second one was crisis prevention and crisis management. So NATO had become relevant by carrying out crisis response operations in different regions. So today, the two organizations are facing also a relevance problem, but Russia-Ukraine war legitimized their relevance.
General, let's turn back to the Russia. So from Moscow's side, what does President Putin ultimately want to end the war in Ukraine?
I haven't heard directly from his statements anything directly and openly. His foreign minister Lavrov stated many times that the areas which are now under Russian control will not be left for a peace. It seems that the Donbas region and Crimea are important for them, and they want these regions be recognized as Russian territory. The second one is the neutral status of Ukraine. They emphasize it in every speech. Ukraine should not become a NATO country, according to them. Thirdly, if a peace deal is agreed, no any foreign troops be deployed into Ukraine. There may be other terms for a peace deal, but these three are seen as the primary ones.
Meanwhile, former President Trump has notably hardened his rhetoric toward Russia. Is this list the reason?
I don't think so. It seemed that Trump agreed on these three terms. But later on, especially with the airspace violation of European countries, the European leaders and also maybe his advisors influenced President Trump's decision. He shifted his policy towards Russia. Now he wants to compel Russia for a peace. He decided also to send Tomahawk missiles, which are very long-range missiles, although they are a bit older generation assets, they can be effective. He also wants European states to stop buying oil and gas from Russia. So it seems like he wants to compel Russia for a peace.
I see. They will be in direct involvement, do you think? And if they won't, can European NATO allies realistically fight or sustain a war against Russia?
The United States has vast capabilities. The US armed forces make it easy for NATO, for European countries, if there is a direct war with Russia. But the United States wants to concentrate on the Pacific region, in particular for the China-Taiwan dispute. They also face some internal problems. President Trump has already employed American forces in the streets against protesters. So they don't want to commit a large-size military force into Europe. They want Europeans to be capable of defending or fighting against Russia. In that sense, the Europeans have already some capabilities. They can carry out a fight against Russia because although the Russian forces are large in size, they face serious challenges fighting a war in Ukraine. Putin and his armed forces were also criticized in Russia for not being able to carry out an in-depth maneuver to reach a decisive victory in a shorter time. So it took a long time. Russian advances were very slow. They were not able to defeat Ukrainian defense in a shorter period. It took 3 years, and it's uncertain whether the Russian forces will be able to advance any further.
I think Europe took the message coming from the President Trump and they started increasing their spendings, but they didn't take full responsibility because I believe they should speak with Russia as soon as possible. Why do you think there are many European leaders so reluctant to open direct communication with Moscow at this stage?
Yes, you are right. I think they should consider talking to Russia because war will not be over soon. No, any party will be the victorious side in a short time. The war in Ukraine, as I said, strengthens Europe's unity. This could be one of the reasons. And they want to contain Russia. They see Russia as a threat to Eastern Europe because countries in the Eastern Europe were part of the Soviet Union and some of them were part of Warsaw Pact. For this reason, to maintain a global status. They want this war to be prolonged. They want to see the collapse of Putin and his government. It's a geopolitical fight indeed between Europe and Russia.
General, those were all my questions for today. Before we wrap up, do you have any closing remarks or final thoughts on the state of European security, Russia, and what lies ahead?
Thank you. As I always say, that they should not fight for war, they should fight for peace.
Yeah, thank you, General, for sharing your insights and perspective with us. And thank you to our audience for joining us on Conflict and War Studies. We'll continue to follow the EU-Russia confrontation and the evolving role of NATO in Europe and the developments happening in the world. I'll see you in the next episode.